Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deep Share Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rouse, and for the last couple of decades, I've slowly been opening my eyes to a very different world than the one I grew up hearing about. And the more conversations I have with interesting people, the more mystifying this world becomes. So without further ado, let's get deep.
We've got science to celebrate! Demons bliss out! After what, baby? Come on!
There is rebellion in the wind. It will crush.
Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw them with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man! None of it is true!
I'm not insane!
This is mass madness, you maniacs! In God's name, you people are the real thing! We are the illusion!
Like, it's been a while since we hung out and talked anyway, so
Yeah.
besides the fact that you brought something intense to my attention, like, it's good to see you anyway, Kalen.
Yeah, right?
So,
Speaking of intense, we're on alert and there's a smoke cloud over my town. That's pretty crazy.
so it's like fires and shit.
Yeah, and the outside of towns, like pretty much evacuated all on the west side and like all the way like hour up the highway. And like you can't even get gas in town. I tried to go fill up my tank before this, and there's this like the longest lines ever. So, I guess my Jeep will burn down.
Yeah, you're literally like, it sounds like you're on the set of an apocalyptic movie or something.
Feels like it.
Act or something. Well, I hope you guys are all okay and your town is all right.
I mean, it's just stuff, whatever.
Is this just normal springtime?
No.
No, okay. All right. Because I know there's some parts
No.
of the West Coast up there that's just like on fire a lot, you know?
So
But-
the weird thing about this is like most people that have kind of a conspiracy mind feel like this is kind of purposeful
Mhm.
because I've never seen so many chemtrails as I've seen in the last month. And we've had this really intense heat wave that is really abnormal. And they're just like crisscrossing over the sky all day, which never happens. You'll get like a line and then a while later another line. But
Mhm.
it's just been like so intense, laying down grids on us, and it just won't stop.
Wow.
It just fires going everywhere, getting put out, coming back, raging, and like I just sort of like I wonder what they're trying to do.
Probably scare the shit out of everybody. That's first
Yeah.
and foremost.
Move us to the 15-minute cities is sort
Yes,
of like a bit of it, I think. And
Yeah,
like get the
corral-
farmers off their
corral-
land so they can confiscate the farmer land. Also to like push the narrative of the obviously global warming thing, right?
Yeah, all the climate agenda stuff is going on. And yeah, I can see how that would be intentional in some way if they're trying to like just evoke more panic over the climate and stuff. Especially like they want to gear it towards it being our fault too. So like they just want to put us in this traumatic state, of course.
Yeah.
But
I mean, who knows?
let's hi everybody. Welcome back to the Deep Share Podcast. I'm here with my friend Kalen from the Strange Neighborhood Podcast. And recently Kalen we're always kind of sharing different resources and interesting little factoids that we find about history. And Kalen brought this book to my attention, and it's a long ass title. And I made some post about it that Kalen shared with me. But yeah, we're going to get into that tonight. You've done a lot of reading into it. I've skimmed a little bit where I could. You were pointing me towards chapter 6 in particular. It took me
And
long
kinda
enough to like try to
7 of it.
find chapter 6 and 7.
Yeah.
But we'll go into it more and, get some cool examples going.
And
But
anyway,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Break
I was
in.
gonna say like those chapters are more about the etymology of like the historical lineage of like where we come from and how it's developed through like names and words and stuff. And that's sort of like your area of expertise.
Absolutely.
So when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, what the fuck is all this? But I know you have the background kind of to like
A little bit. Yeah, I
about it.
absolutely have become obsessed with it, And it's only because I've learned from, Dan Anunnaki Dan and others. It's just I feel like we're all standing on each other's shoulders in a way. We're all helping each other like see over the hill. And eventually it seems like we're going to untangle this whole damn thing. but maybe that's altruistic. I don't know.
I think you're right, honestly. Like, and each, like, I feel like our lost history is something that we almost totally lost. And then all of a sudden there was like a little spark here and there on YouTube. And now it's just like ignited into this, not to use a fire analogy right now, but like it's ignited into this like huge wildfire of like everyone's kind of digging up little scraps and we're all sharing them. I mean, the people that are kind enough to share and want to put the puzzle together, like as a collective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really cool what's happening.
And it's so confusing, and the puzzle's hard to put together because there's so many fake pieces that look like they're supposed to fit or something, you know? And yeah, like I've been saying on different shows lately that it's like we have a lot of flag planting in this community where because we've been told the world is so mundane, now that the floodgates are open and we're like shown that it's not mundane, it's like we're just like, yep, and this is real, and this is real, and this is true, and this is true. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, and I think deep analysis is what we need more than anything, especially about his.
Sorry, 1 sec, Andy.
No problem. No problem.
What's that, Sean? Whatever. I guess it wasn't that important. My husband just arrived from work, so.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into this book. What is this book? What's the name of it again?
Okay, so I got it all right here. So it's
and we can
called,
share screen at some point too if you want to like.
Yeah, sure. I got a bunch of stuff to show you and stuff. It's called The American Nations, or Outlines of a National History of the Ancient and Modern Nations of North and South America by Professor C.S. Rafinesque, Volume 1.
Wow. The mouthful.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. And I'm assuming there's a volume 2, or I don't know, but this one's pretty heavy with the information. I didn't get that far,
Right. So what have you gleaned so far, and what's the overall feel of what it's about?
Yeah, so what he did is he collected all these like historical books and manuscripts and stories around the beginning of the 1800s, and then he has like built a kind of chronology of like the true ancient history as far as he can piece together of the Americas since like before the Great Flood and all the way like this. There's a second flood, and then like everything. So all the peoples that came before us and left or fled to higher places, then came back. Yeah. And then other shit happened, and then the Columbus era after, right? Okay. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. And he also goes through like what I think is so interesting about this book, like a really interesting part, is when he goes through all the kind of he calls them annals of the native people, or like Aboriginals, but they're tales of their history in song and like verses,
mythology and stuff.
Yeah. And he really breaks down like what they mean by words, the words they use, and like what they're referring to when they like talk about the bear came and stuff. Like it's not a bear, it's like a certain kind of people that came, and like how historically all of these ancient peoples refer to the white, like Columbus kind of colonizers as the snakes, the reptiles, the snake people. And I thought that was really fucking interesting.
Yeah, and tracks big time.
Yeah. And like, it's just really interesting, all of it. And I have some stuff highlighted, but I'll just read this first bit I've highlighted because it kind of like talks about what he's talking about, I think, if I have this right. So he says, it is not yet suitable to give here a complete list of all the ancient nations who have or may have colonized the Western Hemisphere. This can only be done afterwards as a result of the instituted inquiries on the subject. Meantime, I state as highly probable, even mere analogies, that all the nearest nations of the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans in the Eastern Hemisphere have either visited or colonized the Americas, particularly from the East, the bold navigators, Atlantas, Pelagians, Phoenicians, Libyans, Etruscans, etc., and from the west and the ancient tribes of the Tartars and Chinese and the Polynesians, etc. We shall, throughout this historical outlines, find ample proofs of this fact, exploding erroneous beliefs that a single nation could have populated the whole of the Western Hemisphere. It shall appear also that these early settlers must have brought along many foreign tribes as auxiliaries, vassals, or slaves.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
so he's
that's
like, yeah, he's saying
putting it right in our
we
face.
didn't just one peoples didn't colonize all of this. It's ridiculous to even think that is what he's basically saying.
This
here.
is part of the spider web, right? I mean, the more you look into it, I focus on like 2 or 3 tribal names or groups of people, nomadic
Mhm.
tribes or something, and then suddenly I'm facing 10 different names, 10 different peoples that I didn't even hear about before, that are all in the mix, and everyone has kind of borrowed or stolen or passed along these same stories. Where you go, or it's just so weird to wonder why this part of history is so controlled and so lost to us. And like, of course, the mainstream explanation is just that it's all stories and folklore and myth, and we don't know. And I don't buy it. I'm sure you don't either.
No, and I also I accompanied this research with this old geography book I found from even earlier that was translated from the late I think it was here, I got it here somewhere. It was like 100 years before this book was even wrote, this geography book. So it talks about like each people's that they found at each place, and like it tears apart the narrative. Like,
Right.
if you
Right.
go back far enough and read what's actually going on in that time, nothing makes sense to what they told us.
Yeah, this is kind of back to what I'm always saying about how, from a skeptical point of view, we're seeing everything as just made up stories and everything, mainly because of literature from the 1800s. The mid 1800s, specifically, was what I'm finding. And it's interesting because of how hot the 1800s is, I guess, in this community from multiple different angles. Like the Tartaria stuff leaks into the 1800s, and so does like mud floods and all these different themes. Something is fucky in the 1800s for sure. And there's absolutely like a metaphorical mud flood when the fictional literature, pop culture literature, starts to enter the game in the 1800s, when it comes to taking these old stories from word of mouth, cultures telling these stories about their origins, and what anthropologists used to consider legitimate information about prehistory in those areas is now just conveniently converted into these like fictional, fantastical stories.
Yeah, it's unreal how much we take literally from this stuff, from like old stories, and how no matter how many times wise people tell us that everything's symbolic and symbolism's the important thing to understand, we still take everything literally. We're digging stuff and being like, oh, this means this happened. Like, as far as the giants go too, like I do believe there was like a large peoples and like maybe even up to 10 feet, 11 feet tall, even, because I do have like a lot of historical accounts of that.
Yeah.
But for as far as like the allegory of a giant peoples, I think is more like maybe larger but brutish and savage, kind of like more people, more warlike and less empathetic culture.
Yeah, brutish, less empathetic, and warring, like warmongering. But also what I'm finding is nobility and royalty in some cases is like almost directly referring to this giant word, in terms of royalty. And it's really interesting. And I brought this up on a couple shows already, but the show Ragnarok on Netflix, it's a little teen angsty, but it's pretty legit for an action show anyway, about the Nordic gods fighting these ancient giants. But the giants are just people. They're just these assholes from Norway that are running the oil companies and stuff. But like, it translates into like modern day. It's kind of like a, Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet from the 90s, what they did with those, which kind of like modernized these old tales. So they kind of do that in a way with this Ragnarok show. They put it down to human terms, but it's kind of telling us that too, where like these giants are just people. But the tall, like 9, 10, 11 feet tall, I think that's completely within this same like understanding. I think one implies the other almost. Or one came from the other. Like they were called giants because it meant noble, but they were noble because they were gigantic and strong, and they were bigger than everybody else. Like it all kind of fits together in the same way. What pisses me off is how, when again, the flag planting with 25, 35 foot tall monsters. Oh, mountains used to be giants and now they're sleeping. Like, I don't know how woo-woo I can handle in that direction. You know what I mean? I feel like that's more fantasy or even distraction and misdirection.
And you know what? It very well could be, but like the fact is that you can't really plant your flag there, because how can you even prove that? Like, why wouldn't you just keep looking?
I mean, yeah, and I shouldn't plant my flag either in saying it's impossible either, I guess, right?
So do you want to screen share and I'll just show you some stuff about giants?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's start with that. So do I have to give you permission or whatever?
I think so.
Screen share, allow. Oh, I think you're good. Nice.
Okay. So this one's from the geography book, and there's about New Zealand.
Okay. And do you remember the name of this geography book? Is this something you sent me too?
Yes, and I'll get the name in a sec.
I can get it. I'll get that while you talk about this.
Okay, so it says for New Zealand, like it didn't have a lot of information about New Zealand, but it has a lot of cool information about like everything. But it says New Zealand, which was discovered in 1642 by the Dutch. The inhabitants are blacks of gigantic size. And so like the Maori, because I used to live in New Zealand, but the Maori are a very large people, like a large stature, very like disproportionately bigger than regular people, or whatever you want to say. Right. Like large bones, large head, big stature. They're big people. And they also have been proven to have like a higher testosterone than other people on the planet for some reason.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which is really interesting. But they were a warring people. They were the story in New Zealand is kind of funny, because these might be the Moriori, or I don't know, because they say that the Maori came after from the Polynesian Islands, and the Moriori were living there before, and they came and they were cannibals and ate all the Moriori into their land. And I don't know who the Moriori were, but there's like stories of stone structures buried in the rainforest in New Zealand and stuff that there's no record of and stuff like that.
Right. So
interesting.
Very interesting.
And so I thought that was really interesting. And then there is, I don't know, I have a whole bunch of like short newspaper little things. So what I do a lot on my show is I collect like old newspaper articles from the 1800s as far back as I can go and try and find anomalies. So I just grabbed a few to show you. So
hell yeah. Well, but right before this, but just to mention the Maori, of course, leave it to me to connect it to Box Saga, but in Paradise Time in the Box Saga, we were all black and everything was tropical. After Atlantis or all land ice, when the catastrophe happened and they were all cut off in Helsinki and the whole northern hemisphere was decimated, all the southern kingdoms continued on. And those southern ringlands that were emulating the fatherland, the all fatherland in the north originally, were all doing the same exact breeding system, supposedly, according to the saga. So if that's the case, then all those southern kingdoms that weren't affected by the ice continued to breed huge people. So I wonder if that is a good connection to that. You know what I mean?
It's so funny they use the term all black because that's like the New Zealand's like most famous sports team is the All Blacks, the rugby team, and they're like really famous and good at rugby.
Oh,
And,
interesting.
like, they're the All Blacks.
That's it. That's a loose connection right there, you know?
But funny that you said that. I was like, the All Blacks. So I just picked a few short ones just to show you what the kind of stuff I find. But this one is from November 26th, 1850. And it says, remains of a giant, a human skeleton of unusual size has been discovered in Persemus, New Jersey, buried in oyster shells of immense size. So the oyster shells were large. It was in a sitting posture when found and is doubtless the frame of an Indian of olden time. It must have been 8 feet in height, which usually that's about like 8 or 9 feet are most of the ones they find. The skull measures 18 inches from the root to the nose, over the top to the bows. I don't know what that says. So they always misspell things and write them weird, but of the occipital bone.
Occipital.
Thank you.
You're doctors.
I'm like, what the most of these words I'm like looking up and making it say it to me because I'm like, what is this?
One paragraph is taking 4 hours to just understand it.
Right? I'm like, what is this?
Especially with the AF right there. You see that on that line. Right? The AF is not as fuck. It's as, because for some reason there's a lot of F's.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
for S's. And I don't know if that was an old thing or just typewriters. Like people fucked up a lot. I don't know.
Yeah. But then it also says containing a full set of teeth, even, sound, and white.
Wow.
Which I think I always find like remarkable. Like they always say that. They're always like, wow, they had good teeth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So like now have you investigated, just curious, because I personally only did this with like 1 or 2 of them that came to me through emails, and they turned out like later articles involving the same thing, same like bones, turned out to be like a mastodon or something. And I'm curious if you think like a lot of them have been done that way and it's on purpose and it's probably like the Smithsonian's involved in some way or something, or if maybe it's some of them are legit and some of them are fake. What's your take on that? Have you seen any of that?
So yes. And there was this one like really massive giant, and I'm not sure, I don't have it with like the article to reference right now, but there was this one really big one. I think it was found in upstate New York. And then they had all the measurements, the breastbone, the shoulder width, like everything. So obviously it was an intact skeleton. And then after it came out and said, oh, this was a hoax and blah, blah, blah. And but the Smithsonian was involved in the first article, which is always like a good clue that like that's the last person you should ever call if you find something. And if you see a UFO, the last people you should call is move on. Just saying, like,
right. So that's
don't fucking tell anyone like that,
especially
anything. Yeah.
That's where I got into the weeds, because I found one that was not Smithsonian involved. It was like local scientists, upon further review, like discovered that it was a mastodon, and it like went into detail on why they figured it was a mastodon and stuff like that. But then I did run into similar situations, just like 1 or 2 that involved the Smithsonian and similar explanations, you know? So it's like 30% truth, 70% bullshit. It's always mixed together, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you've done this. You've collected a lot of them so we can really get into them, you know? So
like I found something really cool, I thought a while ago. So this is just like how you can, because you have to use a discernment. So this is a good example of that. I found something really cool about a buried city, and they were comparing it to like Herculaneum and Pompeii, and it was in Minnesota. And I was just like, wow, this is crazy. And so I was like looking up all the history of when they discovered this place, the lakes around it, blah, 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 trying to figure out what's going on. Turns out after I've like had to dig through a lot of old newspapers that it was like a joke article because they had this huge snowstorm that blocked the railway from getting there. And then they were like, we discovered this city. And they were making a joke about digging it out finally after like a month or whatever, like getting the train back there. Right. And so I was like, what the I just wasted all that time.
Can you
know
imagine
what
if
I mean?
that same thing happens to people like 50 to 100, 150 years or so with our culture and all the things that we don't
So
take seriously and put
confusing.
out there? People are going to be like, this place was insane.
It's already so confusing in this time, trying to
That's
figure out what's
true.
fake and what's real. And then imagine looking back, I think about that all the time.
And that's
I'm like,
definitely
they're not
plan for
gonna
the
know what's
future.
up or down. Like
Right, right. So
yeah.
here's the one that I found and turned out to be, I believe this one was legit too. Um, this was the Williamson County Giant, aka a Pleistocene mega human. But I can share that in a little bit. Let's keep going with what you got
All
because
right.
yeah,
I
we
just
can
got a couple
definitely check
short
that out.
ones, so we might as well just
Hell
go
yeah.
through these. Okay. So this one says, this one's from the Cook County Herald from October 25th, 1902. And it says, ancient skulls are found. While digging a deep trench near Frankenhauser, Saxony, some laborers found human bones buried in the dry loam. The fragments of a skull were so unusually large, they sent all the bones to Professor Geisberg, who said they show an antiquity of 2,500 years old and are the remains of 3 individuals, each 7 feet 6 inches.
Interesting. And as
So,
early
like,
as recent as 2,500 years ago. Like
and I
not
think,
2,500 BC, 2,500 years ago.
yeah.
And so at
But then
that point,
also, it's like putting an ancient people's, and lots of times they say like there's red hair on them. So
of
it's
course.
putting an ancient people before the natives that were a different stature of people completely,
Hmm. Yeah, would have
thousands of years.
different race entirely.
Yeah. And so like I do find that a lot. Like if you're searching the archives and you want to look up find some really weird shit, type in unknown race. You're gonna get hit
Really?
after hit after hit, and it's all gonna be like this. In the mounds, it found sticking out of this, some weird tools they don't understand. And they'll be like, it's from the unknown race from before. And they're in this time period in the 1800s, they were talking about this unknown race all the time.
Mm. And we're gonna slowly but surely see this closed in on and controlled the narrative around this. I'm gonna say that right now. I'm sure you can agree.
Mhm.
If we haven't already, then we're gonna start seeing a crackdown eventually because this alternative American history is picking up some tremendous speed, regardless of what, like no conclusions, but just all the little pieces. There's no way around that something really strange was going on.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel that coming, and I've just been like hoarding these away and saving them, and I'm gonna make a book of all the ones I found just so that there's like a hard copy
That's a
somewhere
great idea.
of
That's
this
a
stuff. And I'm just
I
like,
will help you add to it if I can, if I have
oh,
any.
that'd be great. Honestly, I'm getting so much stuff that I think I'm gonna have to do like different volumes, like one volume on giants, one because it's just getting so immense, and it's like, I might need help like cataloging this shit. Like
That
it's
sounds like
overwhelming me a bit.
that sounds like a better way to go about this than what I've seen recently on Amazon. Like some people just writing these random books on Tartaria and America and all these like ancient American books and stuff. It's like, let's not jump to conclusions yet. Let's just share what was written by the people that were there, and just kind of contemplate what's going on.
Yeah,
So this
so
was in
if you
Sax.
want to talk about Tartaria, we should get into that in a bit because I
No,
got some
damn
stuff from
right.
the geography book, and I have like some ways things I think about that, some thoughts of
Fair
the
enough. Yeah,
Tartaria narrative, right? I think it's like people are using it kind of like as a blanket term, but it is funny how they are trying to erase that nation even existed at all when
yeah,
it's
that is
like
the weird
clearly
part.
did, like, yeah. So
Yeah,
they obviously have some important part in our history, like the Grand Tartaria and the other parts of the Tartary states or whatever you want to call them. I'll get into that from the geography book, but
mhm.
so it's weird that they're trying to like delete that from our history, which I think it might have like some Russian book burning kind of stuff. That's
Absolutely,
why. But
100%.
yeah, and also because the Tartarians were world travelers, same as like the Phoenicians and
Yeah, how
yeah.
about that? Which is interesting. I wonder what covers for what. Like, I mean, if we're talking different time periods or because it's just so convoluted that all the evidence we really do have for all this is recent. It's fairly recent. So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like the Phoenicians weren't super ancient anyway. We're talking
Right.
like a couple thousand years ago, not even.
Yeah. So this one's from Mexico City, which like, fuck, there's so much good stuff about Mexico, but I'm just really trying to focus on like the States and like Canada, what we know at that time, because it's so immense of like a body of information. But some things you can't really pass up. Like this one says, oh, let's see where it's from. It is from February 19th, 1923. And it says Mexico City, Mexico, February 19th. Skeletons of Indians 15 feet in height have been found at Casa Grandes near the city of Juarez. It is believed that the skeletons belong to an extremely ancient indigenous race. Vases also containing precious stones were found near the skeletons. So that's why I brought that one, because there's a 15-foot one, and it kind of like debunks my theory of them only getting 11 feet tall.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Of course, it's convenient that we got literally like 4 sentences in a tiny little, like, what newspaper and what the hell are they printing on the front page that this gets a tiny little blurb, even back then?
If you see on the very left side, you can kind of see like there's pages going down. So that means this tiny article was on the 6th page. And I often find it like that, and it will have very interesting, like 5 sentences where you'd think anyone would want to know more about that, but they don't write anymore. They just
It's
leave
a good
you
starting
hanging.
point.
Yeah.
Microfiche is almost a forgotten art, but there's a lot there at your local libraries,
Right?
if you have a lot of time.
Okay, so I want to show you something interesting that I found from this geography book.
Sweet.
That I think that blew my fucking mind. Okay, so because it goes through every section of known lands. So this is Amazonia, which I think is modern day Brazil or whatnot, something around the Amazon River, that area.
Okay.
So it says, let me just find the spot. Okay.
That every sentence is.
Oh,
cool.
here we go. Yeah. Okay. When the Portuguese in 1541 went up the river into the country, they met in their way on shore an army of warlike women with whom they had a re-encounter, and from thence they called this country Amazonia. So like the story of the Amazon women that the Greeks told, and then I looked it up, and the Smithsonian says like, oh, it was all myths. There's nobody. How would the Greeks know anything about the Amazon anyway at that time? Well, if you know anything like we know, everyone was everywhere. Like,
and talk about like some of the earliest superhero mythos too in modern America, which is interesting because as I'm drawing a blank on his name, but oh man, he's awesome. He writes great books, but he talks a lot about the revival of the gods through superheroes and things like that. It's pretty crazy. He's from the Secret Sun blog.
Oh yeah. So when you look up the mythology from the Smithsonian, they say that they were maybe this warring women, kind of like, or female-led society that eventually moved to, I don't know how to say this, but Scythia. You were talking about it. Yeah.
No.
Right? Yeah. So,
wait,
and I heard you and Dan talking about it.
Moved to or moved from?
It says moved to or were maybe from.
Okay. So that's interesting.
And that was in the Smithsonian article about like, were the Amazons real? No, they might have been these women that moved to Scythia.
And the Scythians were, they try to do this thing where they're like, well, these were just like, this is the name we use for groups that we don't know. It's like, that's not true.
Not
because
true
once
at
you start
all.
to look into the Phoenician alphabet and how it's put together and what words mean, they point to different people on purpose. You know, the Scythians are very specifically a group around the Mediterranean that operated for a long time, and they're connected to everything else. It's very interesting because we find Scythians being talked about in the Americas often. I found another article recently. Actually, it might have been you who sent it to me.
Maybe. But yeah, I just was like, that's a really odd connection. And because like we have so much Greco-Roman architecture that's like kind of unexplainable in early America, or they try to explain it away, but I'm not sure it's explainable. That like obviously the Greeks and the Romans were here already at one point here and there in the history, who knows when. And then this is connecting Scythia to the Amazon women, who they're trying to say didn't even exist. But if you read this, it says that they did. They encountered them on the river, and they were warring female warriors that they had to fight. Like
That's nuts. And if
yeah,
it really does fit quite nicely with everything.
Oh, here's the Amazon. Oh no, yeah, maybe. I do have the link, but I'll send you it later for the Smithsonian article. It's real bullshit. We don't need to talk about it here.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah. It'll be good. It'll be good. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes or something too, just so people can check it out. I mean, we all
sweet.
can all shit right on the Smithsonian.
Right. And so then there's this other thing, and it's Turcumania and Terra Magellanica. It's Magellan discovered it. Yeah, Magellanica. There you go. And so this is just the start of it here, but it says where does it lie? It lies it joins to that of Chile and southward.
Yeah, where doth the country of Turkey? That's a weird word. I've heard someone mention this before.
It's from south to north, 640 miles long, and from west to east. So it's like I think it's like Patagonia, basically, like the southern part of South America in some place, maybe not exactly the very tip, but I think like Magellanica is the tip because it's talking about how Magellan like sailed around it or whatever, right?
Okay.
And discovered it. And then this talks about giants somewhere in here. Sorry, I should have highlighted it.
That's okay.
But it says that they're
skimming. I see giants on the other page.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Chapter 6.
Okay, so it says, what sort of people were the natives? Some old authors among the Spaniards, so from way before even this book, which was the late 1600s, and then it was translated later.
Wow.
The Spaniards made them
monstrous.
Yeah, monstrous giants of 12 feet high. But later travelers give them the ordinary size of men. They are very ignorant, have no religion, nor do they are they qualified for doing anything.
They dig roots called capus, which serve them instead of bread. What?
Yeah.
Well,
so like
sounds like two different people. I mean,
made
them Spaniards made them into monstrous giants. Right. Okay, well, this could be two things, right? This could be two different people, or it could be like trying to keep others away from that place.
Yeah,
because that happens
like,
a lot.
Go there. There's 12-foot giants.
That's like the Phoenicians ruling the Atlantic Ocean, and like there be dragons there. Serpents,
and then like maybe they found a bunch of gold, and they were like don't go there.
Right.
I find that like all the places in South America, whether they were cannibals or not, I don't know if there's proof to that, but they basically in this book say everything in South America is cannibals, in Central America, and even in like Southern United States.
Yeah, so, I've seen that a lot too in these old books, talking about even the giants, particularly like all the cannibalism tribes and stuff like that. It's more than you think in history.
But then there is another theory I have that like there was a time when the atmosphere was different and things were bigger, and maybe like it was a slow reduction in size over time because everything else reduced in size over time as well.
I think that could be it too. There's another theory from like Robert Sepper that involves Cro-Magnon, and I'm not too There's a lot of big words involved. So I haven't really
Yeah.
got it in my photographic memory at all yet. But like, yeah, it's interesting because that kind of ropes in Bigfoot for me quite often. Um, I listened to a podcast called the SCP Archives, which is like this secret government agency that keeps the lid on all the anomalous shit that happens in the world. And it's just
Huh.
like a fictional podcast that comes from a Reddit, and anyone can submit their own stories. But
Oh,
they have to follow the format to like, fill out like what kind of uh, memoir it's going to be and stuff like that. It's all like recorded as if you're a new recruit looking through these audio files. And
oh
one of
yeah.
them is SCP 1000, and it's Bigfoot. And it's kind of a joke at first because it's like 4 seasons deep into the show. It's not one of the early SCPs, but it gets real serious. And the mythology that they weave into this story had me thinking like, well, places like this are often used as dumping grounds for things they want a little tidbit out into the public here and there. And that could be a little paranoid, but they talk about Bigfoot as like not only our counterparts, but like better than us and stronger than us and superior to us in every way. They walked at night, we walked in the daytime. They built natural machinery. Like their technology was more advanced than ours, but completely different and more naturalistic. And eventually we got the upper hand with their technology or something and wiped them out and destroyed them all and left the remaining ones like with their brains scrambled and shit. It's this whole thing about their like this leftover megalithic fucking race. And in the end, they start talking about how there's like communication efforts on the part of Sasquatch more and more as time goes on. And a recent recording had been roughly translated to given choice for now, we forgive you. Or it's like, we forgive you, given choice for now, not forever. Let us back in. And it's just like the most cryptic, cool little horror story. But at the same time, it makes me feel like that's at least someone that's looked into it or someone leaking some shit, because that's clearly what we have going on in our history, where I think maybe Sasquatch might be involved with this. And that might be a stretch. I don't know, but just throwing it in there.
Hey, I don't think that's a stretch. I mean, I think it's interwoven into like the UFO phenomenon, the missing 411 phenomenon. Like, I think there's
Absolutely.
a weird connection we don't understand already. And so I did bring an article about Bigfoot from 1901.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Barbarous men. And
yeah.
Barbar, according to Box Saga, Barbar, their bars were bare, as in naked people, fucking crazy heathens. Obviously, it goes a
Oh,
little further into this like hairy man, wild man kind of thing. But yeah, interesting
yeah.
connection.
So I'll just read this to you. It's from the Ellendale Eagle, July 11th, 1901, and it's Wyoming's Barbarous Men. A report reaches St. Paul, Minnesota, that a tribe of wild men has been discovered in the northern part of Fremont County, Wyoming. So during 1901, this tribe was still there.
Mm-hmm.
It is said that two families are married and intermarried until they evolve such characteristics as to make them really a tribe. There are about 200 of them. They live among the mountain fastnesses and resent all intrusion with great fury. The law can give victims of their assaults little satisfaction.
Well, sounds like
Yeah, like
Bigfoot encounters.
arrest them. um, he who goes among them goes at his own peril. It is further alleged that several of the men committed such depredations on the ranches in the northern parts of that state that stockmen organized to defend themselves. And in the pursuit of one of the marauders, the stronghold of the Cretans was discovered. So they were like warring with a tribe. Anyway,
Of
one of
wild
the
men.
yeah, it describes them a bit at the end here, right? One of the stock thieves was a man of 40 years age or more. He wore no clothes except of the most rudimentary nature. His body was covered with black hair that afforded protection from the weather. He had no language except unintelligible sounds. His strength was Herculean. Upon being closely pursued by one of the stockmen, the Cretan turned upon the pursuer and, catching man and horse into his arms, hurled them over a 40-foot butte.
My
And
God.
that's the entire story. Like, fuck off. Why wouldn't they write more about this?
You know, a couple of these little moments here like stood out to me, and I think I actually heard this story read a long time ago on Sasquatch Chronicles with Wes Germer. I think someone read this at some point, and they didn't mention it, but I remember thinking, and I'm thinking it again. It's interesting how I wonder if these types of tribes have slowly become Sasquatch, like mythical, but the further back in time you go, the more they're described as men and women, like normal people, but just huge and wild.
And then, but he grabbed a whole horse and a guy at the same time. Is the part that I was like, what the fuck, man? What?
That's why this sounds exactly like Sasquatch, because like the stories from witnesses there, it's just insane. Like even my encounter that I don't even know if it was a Sasquatch or not because it was so dark and we had no light on it whatsoever, but it shook a tree that when we went back to it the next morning was like 6 to 8 inches around, and it was shaking it like it was nothing. And like bears don't do that. And it wasn't a person, and we had been followed up the trail for a mile. It was crazy. So
that sounds almost identical to my friend's story. And like for a while, I just thought like back because he told me it so many years ago that I was like, this is I think was maybe a bit too fucked up or something. But he went camping, not even that far from my house, like a fucking 10-minute drive down the road into this valley at the river. And they were camping and they heard there was trees shaking and stuff. And I can't remember. I was trying to get the information from my husband, but he didn't reply. But I think this thing approached the fire and then they all just ran out of there. And like they had to hike up the trail a bit. So they ran up the trail, got in their cars and came straight home. And like he swears it was a Bigfoot.
Dude, so here's the thing. I hadn't listened to Sasquatch Chronicles or anything. Of course, I had seen Harry and the Hendersons, and I had seen the Patterson Gimlin footage, of course, but like I never paid attention to it. And that night, we slept on a cliff because we were hiking a mountain, and we ended up sleeping on a little outpost in the middle of the mountain, a little vista, right on the edge of a frigging cliff with our fire behind us facing the woods, just absolutely terrified that whatever it was coming back. And it just like it shook us to our core, and it took us a while to even react. So after hearing tons of shit on Sasquatch Chronicles years later, I was like, holy fuck, I think this makes a lot of sense for what happened to me. And they don't get a lot of reports from like New Hampshire, Maine. Like there's not a lot going on out here, so, but there really is. It's everywhere.
It's really crazy. We got off on like a really wild tangent from what we were talking about with the book.
Yeah, we were supposed to talk about a book, but I like when this happens.
I think this kind of like ties into his whole ancient history. But have you heard of the Melangians?
Melangians.
I hope you haven't, because it's so exciting to show you.
I don't believe I have.
All right, hold on to your socks here.
Melangians.
Okay, let's find. So this is a book about them, and it kind of summed it up nicely, like the
resurrection of a proud people. And we got Kennedy's writing this.
Yeah. Oh my God. I keep finding Kennedy stuff everywhere.
Of course.
I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, embedded in all this historical stuff, that name's just like bing, bing coming up a lot. But it's funny. Do you know what? That my grandma's maiden name was Kennedy.
No shit.
But we're not related. We're just like, our Irish ancestors, I guess, are probably related to them, but we were just poor potato farmers, so I don't think we got any of the sweet kickbacks.
Right.
So it says as early as 1654, which if later they try and say it was in the late 1800s, but as early as 1654, English and French explorers in the southern Appalachians reported encounters with dark-skinned, brown and blue-eyed and European-featured people. people speaking broken Elizabethan English, living in cabins, tilling the lands, and smelting silver, practicing Christianity, and most perplexingly of all, claiming to be a Portuguese. But Portuguese, yeah, but they spoke like a broken English, so they said it funny, I guess.
Do you know that if you go to Portugal and ask any of the people where their ancestors are from, they all will tell you they're from Atlantis?
Yeah, I think there's something about Portuguese people. And honestly, I think these people said they were Portuguese because of slavery at the time, because Portuguese people weren't slaves, they were free people. And these people had copper skin, and they were always like being discriminated against and like being fucked with, because they're like, are these people black or are these people, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, they're not Slavic and they're not black.
They were testing how flat their feet were and stuff, and harassing them all the time as the railway came through and stuff. And so it says they said they're Portuguese and they're declared free persons of color, because I think that's why they say that. And in the late 1700s, by the English and Scotch Irish immigrants, the Melungeons, as they were known, were driven off their lands, denied access to voting, to education, and the right to judicial process. So these people were found as the colonizers or settlers moved up into the Appalachian area from the East Coast. And they found them there already there, and they were like, they had high cheekbones and they looked like Egyptian, a lot of people say. And then I heard you guys talking about Abraham Lincoln. It's suspected that Abraham Lincoln was a Melungeon, like had of Melungeon blood, and was a descendant of these people. And something else weird about him, when I was studying Akhenaten and Nefertiti, because of that thing I found on the UN flag, I'm not sure if you've seen, but
yeah.
So I was looking at them, and it's like my first real look at Egyptian history. And so they had elongated skulls, and it said that Abraham Lincoln did too. And just them, their kids, and King Tut, who is suspected to be their son, are the only Egyptians that had this elongated skull.
Really? Those are the only ones in Egypt?
Yeah. And when Akhenaten came into power, they moved the capital. They changed the religion to a monotheistic, like sun god.
Sun god, yep.
And they try to change everything, and they like changed the entire system and everything. But then after they were like, their rule was over, it all went back.
And don't they say that Akhenaten was like, is that the one that they connect to Moses or Noah? I can't remember.
If it's connected to Noah, that's crazy, because I found some weird Noah connections in this book that we were looking at. So wait till you see this. You're gonna like this. But well, maybe we'll just look at these Melungeons for a sec here.
Sure.
So then I found 2 articles about them, some old articles, and they're pretty long. And so maybe I'll just put them on the screen so people can read the whole thing. But it basically says,
race.
Yeah. They're called the Melungeons. They're found no place else. They have been traced back to North Carolina, but no further. Yeah. And then it says they do speak like a broken Elizabethan English, and some of them were Christians, but I think maybe also they say they're Christians so that they weren't to like turn into slaves too, right?
Maybe.
But in this article, it says the language they do speak is an unknown one to the most accomplished linguist.
That's interesting.
Which I
wonder if people have heard of these Melungeons. Because I mean, please, people dig in. Melungeon, Melungeon. Maybe I've heard it in passing, but I haven't focused in on. I keep thinking to the Portuguese thing and the Portugal connection to Atlantis.
I'll show you some pictures of them because they look Portuguese.
Absolutely.
Like, this is one of them. One of the families, the Melungeons. Look at that guy's mustache. I was like, they look like my Brazilian dark friends.
European, yeah.
And then here's like a big spread of.
And you said a lot of them have blue eyes too.
Yeah, so at the top you can see that guy in the middle has blue eyes, and like it's kind of hard to tell because it's black and white, but you could tell like their eyes look a little bit milky, some of them, and that would hint to blue eyes in the black and white photos.
You connect these to the Northern Africans.
Yeah, that's what I was
But
thinking.
that group even had, there's a lot of them with blonde hair and light skin too of
So that
theirs.
if you read through some of these articles, it does say a bunch of them have blonde hair,
Hmm.
golden
Oh, with
hair,
the
blonde
Melungians too?
hair.
No shit. I wonder if these
Uh,
Melungians are the, what are those the, are those the Ashkenazi?
yeah, like
Let's Northern blonde Africans. Who are these people? The Melanesians.
so
Well, those are the
they
world's black people with blonde hair.
oh
Um,
yeah.
that's not who I'm talking about.
So like the word Melungeon, I guess, is I think a French, it's a like a version of a French word that means like a mixture.
Okay.
So they're, and then they're like nowadays when you read articles about them, they trying to say, oh, they were a mix of black natives and whites, and the whites were early Dutch explorers that got shipwrecked. The way to explain. Oh, and we tested their DNA. That's what they are. And I'm like, yeah, I seen how those DNA tests go. Like, I don't trust that for a second.
Yeah,
This
exactly. Yeah, that's they're building a massive database.
is just the tail end of that in case anyone wants to read it that is watching this. But it basically says what I've already said in the other ones, like that they're an unknown people of unknown origin. A bunch of them have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they look sort of Egyptian in features. They have angular, like Caucasian shaped faces
Yeah.
more. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. And I thought it kind of went into this because it kind of shows that there's like, especially in the mountainous areas, because what this guy says in the book is that the two floods wiped out civilizations in North America.
Interesting.
And then it says like the way that the etymology of the words of like how people escaped, how native people, where native people went during floods and stuff, it lends like a theory to them going to high ground. So like the
Okay.
few mountain ranges would have held the last pockets of civilization
Mhm.
during the floods.
That makes sense. And I hate to do it, but there's another connection here. It's like if they mostly stayed in the mountains and traveled through the mountains, that's where Bigfoot is too.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I'm not
And
saying it's
maybe
the same thing. I'm not calling these people Sasquatch. You know what I mean? But like it's there's something there. There's some sort of connection there.
we are
But we're probably
connected
talking about two
to,
completely different things. The Sasquatch thing is most likely like an admixture situation from way back. I don't know. Who knows?
maybe like an evolutionary trait of the ice age.
Could be. Or I hear for years when people ask like what people think Sasquatch is, a lot of people point to Nephilim, and for a long time I just kind of laughed at that, rolled my eyes because like a lot of the people are just like Christians kind of believing a supernatural version of things and attaching that to Bigfoot. But honestly, even under what I think what Nephilim might be in terms of like a very human sort of situation, like, yeah, I mean, maybe the idea that they were deformed or whatever, the idea they were monstrous, the Nephilim, maybe that is what Sasquatch is. But here I go, keep bringing it back to Sasquatch. Let's stay with these ancient people that we know exist.
And so like then it's funny you bring up Nephilim because he talks about them in this book and then he connects it to like a royal or like I guess the royalty of a certain time is what I think what he supposed from it. Did you find that part in the book? I was
I
highlighted so
think
much
it
I
was
don't know
some.
where the fuck
Is
I
that the
put it.
part I think they mentioned the Canaanites, didn't they?
Yeah. And then he just said like I think he said he like supposes that the word Nephilim is connected to like a person higher above you, not necessarily godly, but more kingly type
Okay,
of people, or like the ruling class, maybe.
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't know. I
That's
think that's
it's
on the page I sent you, but
okay. Well, then let me see what I can see. Let me just go back to my shit here.
maybe I'll just read this list of things that he like goes to prove in the book because there's like quite a few
Yeah,
good points, and then people can look more into the book if they're interested in these things. But so then I'll just read what I have highlighted that he writes. And this is at the beginning of the book in chapter 2. He says, as early as 1825, I sent. So he talks about how he like wrote a history already, sent it to the Academy of Science in Boston, and they basically like stole it and never got back to him.
Oh, Jesus. That
They
makes
were
sense.
like encouraging him to write it and saying he was gonna like get all these awards and stuff, and they wanted to know everything he had to know. And when they got it, it was crickets, and they just like took it and were just like, fuck you, we don't know what you're talking about.
I found that page. I found that
Okay,
page.
let's
Yeah,
hear
and
it.
it is the Canaanite part. Yeah. So I read this recently on a show too. And yeah, this is important. This is very interesting. The Canaanites or Kabbals have been deemed parents of the Atlantes or Atlantes and Africans. They were skillful, powerful, and wicked, inventing agriculture and arts, building cities, while the Sethites invented astronomy, letters, and dwelt in tents. If the American Atlantes were antediluvian, they must have sprung from the Atlantes Canaanites, kin of Moses. And I do believe Moses is the one that Akhenaten is connected to, but I could be wrong.
Interesting.
In 1170, this is weird. I'm not sure. Yeah, in 1170 years after Adam, the egregori angels of Mount Ema came to Mount Hermon in 20 tribes under their king Semi-Azar, and uniting with the Canaanites, gave birth to the Rephaim, Nephilim, and Eliud tribes of giants, tyrants, and cannibals who made war on the angels and men, which that threw me off because I connect obviously the angels to all these things we just mentioned.
He later connects angels to other things, like saying that they weren't exactly angels like you think when they talk.
Well, right. I definitely wasn't thinking of them in supernatural terms.
Oh, yeah,
But it's interesting to say that like the Nephilim and Rephaim and Eliud fought against, like these giants fought against the angels and men or made war on them. It's interesting because I would assume that the angels, in my simple hypothesis that isn't completely developed, it's that the angels are these same peoples, these sea peoples, But anyway, go ahead.
Like the Bible story, how does it go? That the Nephilim were, or is this from like the book of Enoch or something? What the Nephilim were the offspring of angels that banged humans, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah,
I guess, which is weird
that's
because
the story, right?
so yeah, the sons of God mated with the daughters of men, which is interesting because like again, we have caste systems in like Bach Saga that where I believe it's the woman of the higher caste that is impregnated by the lower caste man. I can't remember, but I think it's the opposite. The higher caste male impregnates the lower caste female, and it connects all the castes together under one bloodline, basically.
So in the geography book, it basically says the same thing, but if you think of the angels as like Anglo or white people,
Yeah,
the men,
Anglo,
because the men were all the colonizers were ships full of men, and then they bred with the women of the tribes,
right,
and then made a new kind of race of natives in a way,
and the people that are
areas.
Right. And the thing is, again, aligned with the saga, these Acer people, they believe that their way of survival with the birthing system was the only way to keep the human race pure and all that. And I know what that kind of sounds like much later in history, the pure race and all that kind of thing. So we have this story of the Nephilim being so destructive, this outcome of these two different races coming together, and it's interesting. It just comes together.
It's super interesting when you think about how they talk about all the Americas being covered in cannibals after, because they had all these copper colored races, and is that what they're talking about, Nephilim, like these barbarous, like brutal people that were strong giants or whatever, or like
Right.
or like a rough, brutish people, is that like the tribes of like, you know, that came after, like it kind of would, like it's a kind of very similar stories to that Nephilim story.
Yeah, honestly,
The
like
colonizing.
throwing out all of my Bigfoot talk tonight, like just like
No, I
erase
love
that
it.
for a minute. Like
Yeah.
thinking of this as strictly like I often compare this to like a Romeo and Juliet type story, where it's
Mhm.
like two families that are not to be put together. And I think a lot of that is this racial divide back then.
Star-crossed lovers.
Right, right. It's
And
this
they were
ancient story.
seafaring.
It's this
You
very
know?
famous story. It's as famous as the prodigal son story, which
Mhm.
is fucking abundant in these things as well.
And all these
Oh.
old stories are allegories. So you really have to like try to understand the symbolism.
Yeah,
And if they're talking about like all like if they're saying like using metaphors and saying angels and stuff, and it's actually metaphors, like what are they actually saying? Like we got to kind of dive a bit deeper.
right. And it's interesting too. I mean, just to get into the weeds a little bit, I know I've mentioned it a while back before, but angel and angle both go back to the Phoenician alphabet and become the same term. So when you think about the architects and the builders and everything,
I mean, like the good guys
might be a
came
loose connection, but
and
angles,
banged all
right?
these lower people and then made these brutish people. Like it kind
Mm,
of goes with the narrative that they're trying to tell.
yeah. So just reading the end of this here, the Egregori have been deemed the titans of the Greeks, and Atlas was a titan. Although gigantic nations existed in America, the Talugas, Toltecas, Caribs, Chileans, being often such, the term giant must always be understood to refer to powerful, perverse men. And that's so important. That's such an interesting thing to read, you know.
Ponder. Yeah.
And again, it doesn't have to mean that.
There was
Like,
never giants.
right. I think it's in tune with one another. I think it goes together. We just don't have all the pieces yet
And
of
maybe
why it fits together.
maybe we borrowed that term a bit and applied it to the wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe these are two different concepts and they're just sharing the word.
Could be.
You know what I mean?
Well, because I know that, like, I traced it back to the root of giant. I traced back to Earthborn, which to me echoes again superior race, chosen people, first, most important, all these metaphors that you can attach to whatever this earthborn reason for, like, why does it mean earthborn, right?
Yeah.
And why would that also be attached to big people, right? So that's where I'm getting that like double meaning, and I think it's coming together somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Let's keep going.
Okay,
We got a
so I'll
little bit
read
more
this
time. We
list.
might have to do a part 2 on this, honestly. I
We
think it'd be
probably
worth it, you
will.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I'll just read this little list of things that he kind of tries to prove in this book. I mean, there's quite a few points, but I'll read the ones I highlighted that I think
Sounds good.
were worthy. Okay, so number one, therein proved that in 1825 that there are yet materials enough, notwithstanding the loss of many, for an ancient history of America. So he's saying like it's not all lost. There's enough information to piece it together, just no one is. But then he says, number two, that a complete American history ought to employ and combine all materials afforded by geology, geography, physics, chronology, physiology, ethnology, archaeology, philology on America with all the traditions of Americans. And which I think he does like a really good job of. He goes through like geography, etymology, mythologies, and like just shows how it all connects. Number three, geology and physical geography indicates the cradles and ancient settlements of mankind, which he talks about like where they went to during certain times and how they sprung forth from them. And then it says America has an ancient geography previous to 1492, which ought to be restored. Number five, the coincidence of names and nations and tribes afford a comparative concordance, indicating ancient connections or identity, which I think is the most important thing that he did.
Yes.
Is
I
connect
agree.
even like the natives, everything, like the words, the sounds, the stories, it all
Mhm.
connects to these ancient cultures.
And just to say this real quick, I do think that we have a limited range of sounds that we all use. And I think this is I guess you could say, compelling argument against what we're suggesting and what a lot of people throughout history have suggested with etymology. Even etymologists fall on both sides of this from what I've seen. Some people suggest, no, a lot of this is coincidence, but that's the same type of mind and quote unquote expert that we find in every field saying things are coincidence. So yeah, again, 30-70 rule, truth,
There
lies,
are no coincidences.
and that being the penultimate, that the ultimate thing right there is that above all else, there are no coincidences.
No.
And that's the thing. That is the compelling argument against the mainstream, is that these connections are too intense. Like there's too many layers to them, and they
There's just
continue
too
to
many.
corroborate one another over and over and over again. I feel like I'm constantly putting the cart before the horse and finding exactly what I'm looking for. And how dare someone say, "Oh, that's you just whatever you're looking for, you're going to find on the internet." That's
Yeah.
not the case, man. It's rigorous research, and you got to second and third and fourth guess yourself. Always question, make sure.
People
And we're
also
still
will say,
questioning.
you're the only person in this reality. You're creating the reality. So of course what you want to find, you'll find. And I was like, that's a cop
Yeah, I don't
out
buy
too.
that either.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole different tear.
Right. Right.
All right,
Then
continue on with his
then
proofs.
okay, number 6 is the ancient American population must have derived from nearest shores of Africa, Europe, and Asia. The points where all the indications and traditions tend are the Antilles, next Paria, and Guyana in South America. It goes on to say a bunch more about also through Alaska, but they came across the sea.
Mhm.
And it says number 7, which I thought you might like, the philological solution of historical affinities must be sought in the roots of languages.
Hell
Their
yeah.
conformity of analogies and the number of similar sounds, roots, and words which are susceptible of a mathematical calculation and referable to the theory of probabilities. He's saying it's way more probable than people say it is.
Yeah.
Like it connects too richly.
That's beautiful. So he
And
said what I was
mathematically,
trying to say in a
language.
much more intelligent way.
And also
Yeah.
like he makes it a bit convoluted, but that's how they used to write everything.
I kind of love it. I love it.
It's beautiful. Sometimes I have to read sentences a few times, but it's beautiful. They're always
They were
really cool.
masters of language.
Really, truly. Even in the newspaper, sometimes I'm like, wow, what a sentence.
Yeah.
Number 8, many primitive nations in all parts of the earth may thus be proved to be akin and related. Number 9, Noah's flood was nearly general, but perhaps not universal. His ark, or Thebe, Thbe, was perhaps Tibet. So he also said that like during the deluge that they went to those mountains in Tibet, a lot of people, and that was like a pocket of civilization that survived. And thus 3 sons, which were 3 nations, were saved there, because he says 3 sons.
But
it was actually 3 nations were saved in that pocket of civilization from the flood.
That's crazy.
Yeah, right? And then he says, it has been proved that all antediluvian patriarchs were nations, their long ages being the duration of dynasties or states. So when we look at history and they say this king lasted 300 years, and they're like, how could people have lived for 300 years? When you read ancient texts, that's the civilization. It's personified as a king, but it's really like an entire people's, their beginning, middle, and end, right?
It's the all-father system.
Yeah, exactly. And then
crazy.
The second flood was like Peleg's flood. Is that how you say it? Peleg. Peleg. Yeah. Flood was volcanic. not
Oh,
so general
God.
as Noah's. So that was when like the weird melting and stuff happened, because I do have newspaper articles of like ruins they found in the um Colorado River Valley and stuff, of like melted stone structures and stuff that experienced a high heat event. And so there was like a volcanic tumultuous time, and then it caused flooding because of that. And it's not to be mistaken with Noah's flood, and it's different dates. And he says that number 12, the cradle of Tulans or Mexican nations must have been the Tulans of Asia, since Turan and Tartary. There are many places called Tula all over the world, indicating settlements of Atlantis.
You also have
13. Well, go ahead.
the Tokharian mummies in China that are like 7 feet, 6 feet, and they have blonde or red hair, and they are these old giants or nobility or something. It's weird.
Yeah. Exactly. Number 13, the ancient chronology of America may be restored. Several dates given and a system proposed, which is so cool when you go in, and like I encourage everyone to read this book, because they have all this like Native American mythology, and he like breaks it all down really geniusly and does like a chronology of their tales and stuff, and like what was happening and stuff at that time, and why they said this and why they called this person the frog man or whatever. And like, you know, it all makes sense when he kind of like, and he figured this out by going back and learning the language himself, because he couldn't find someone to help him. So he like went through this ancient Native American kind of languages, and like went to people that could teach him bits of it, found bits of like books and stuff, I guess, and manuscripts about it, and like actually had to learn the sounds and stuff, so he knew what they were talking about in the songs and like how it related to our natural history.
That's that's the way it has to go, and that's what I've seen done by people that are doing this breakthrough work, is get in with the locals and learn their old languages.
Yeah. Number 14, all the races and complexions of mankind are found in America. Number 15, America was known to the ancient nations, particularly the Atlantes, Pelagians, Phoenicians. Number 16, some highlands of America are not covered at Noah's flood. So enter the Melangians, maybe, right?
Right.
And might have become the asylums, I guess asylums, but he puts a Z, asylums of man, animals, and vegetation. However, but few nations can be traced to these asylums in America. So he's saying that some can be, you know. Number 17, the ancient monuments of both Americas are similar to the primitive monuments of Asia, Africa, and Europe. And that's what we've all been digging through with the Tartaria, or like the lost history of the cities and stuff.
And what year did he write this book?
This book was from 1826, I think. Maybe
he's saying there's ancient monuments back then.
He says it tons in here about wood, stone, pyramids. He's saying the mounds, there are stone structures, there's weird caverns and things that aren't explained for.
Most of which we have documented as big presentations to the public in World's Fairs and things like that. This is crazy to get a guy from this time period talking about it. Like, I haven't heard that from any of this yet. This is pretty crazy.
If you do look in newspaper archives and look up ancient race, you will find all these accounts of them finding these stone structures and weird chambers buried, and everything's under the layer, and it's because of a flood. Obviously, there wasn't a mud flood. It didn't liquefy the land. No, it was a rain flood, and that sediment on the land that covered shit. Just
yeah,
like I thought.
To me, that's a sidetrack that they try to do. Like, they create this mud flood idea that it can just be a flood, you know?
Right? Why don't anyone ever?
I think
feel
they
like
have.
Not many people
they
say
try to
that.
separate it. I don't know too much about it, but I think that they try to separate. Like, no, there's a difference, and this is what a mud flood is. And maybe that's true. Maybe they do exist technically. It's still a flood. It's not like what's going to be moving. It's going to be mud. And they try to say the liquefaction thing, and that's not like those buildings would be ripped to shreds if it was liquefaction. They wouldn't even exist.
And
So anyway,
so
and rant.
another thing that connects that for me is that I live east of the Rocky Mountains in a northern place where if you look at a flood map, we'd be like one of the last places to flood.
Mhm.
And there's fucking seashell fossils 5 minutes down the road for me.
Wow. That's
And
so
they're
awesome.
all around. There's a place called Fossil Falls. There's like, and it's seashells. Like,
Holy shit.
so why is there, and they try to explain it in weird ways about like they came from dinosaur times and stuff. And I don't know what they're like, you know what I mean? Like the explanations are so crappy and loose that I'm just like, none of it makes sense. And
Yeah.
like, oh, when the glaciers melted, this place flooded a little bit. And I don't know. Yeah, there's all kinds of things they say about. There's seashells. Like I could go get some in like 5 minutes just down the road in a little like creek bed.
That's crazy.
We went there with my geology class and dug them.
That's nuts.
So then it also says the religions of Americas were similar to the primitive religions of the Eastern Hemisphere. The manners and customs of the Americans are very various and form no peculiar test. Many American nations were highly civilized, besides the Mexicans and Peruvians, skillful in agriculture and arts, having cattle and colleges, etc. So he also talks about like certain tribes, and so does the geology book of Native Americans that lived with cattle, like had cows. They were farmers.
Mm-hmm. Jesus.
And then
This
so
is
his
so
last
great.
yeah, so then yeah, that's all the points. That's kind of like his overview of what he goes through and tries to prove through this book.
That's awesome. So maybe our part 2 will be like a deeper dive, and we'll kind of like we'll both tackle some chapters specifically and highlight some important points. And I'll be ready. You'll be ready. We'll take our time, but it'll come down the pipe sooner than later, you know?
And I just feel like more things point, like the longer I hold this book, I can find more connections in other places to it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But
I
this
think we've
part's
made a lot already.
this part's really interesting what he says. He says the ancient monuments of both Americas are very numerous, indicating a dense population in places since become wild and desolate, as in North America, Guyana, Brazil, etc. And it says they are, sorry, it's on the other page. They are most numerous in the central parts of both Americas, lessened towards both ends, but are still present.
Now, do you think he's referring to like little like mud houses?
So he definitely isn't, because he goes into detail.
Okay, right, because you said he was talking about like pyramids.
Stone monuments. The
Stone
thing he says about
monuments,
like
yeah.
monuments, idols, buildings,
Dude.
and like so the stuff I find in the newspapers about the ancient race and the stone structures, there's like multi-story buildings, pyramids, intense like cave cities and things all over America. And of course, Smithsonian comes, cleans up and fucking deletes. Deleted. And they were just wiping out these mounds across America. Like they had so much disrespect for the historical part.
And Lincoln talks about the mounds too.
Yeah. And so
When
I have
he's
this
at Niagara of all places.
This is from a book called The Mound Builders, and it's from the 1800s as well, I think around 1850. And then he has a map here of like, kind of like what area and what type of mounds and stone structures and stuff. Like there's military works, there's rock effigies, there's altars and beehive tombs.
Beehive tombs.
I have this article where they found something under the White House, and I think I have it handy if you want to. I just gotta look at my other
yeah
file, and it's pretty short. I think I put it in here. Let's see.
You're very organized. This is the only way I can do things.
I try to just be organized for shows, because or else I'll be like, I'm still scrambling anyway, usually. But
right, this information is so dense and the language is hard.
Here. Oh, I don't know where it is. But anyway, I'll just tell you the stories and I'll send it to you later. So they were digging under the White House to make repairs or like a refurbish an area. And 10 feet below a sub basement, they found an ancient chamber with an oven in it and skeletons, and it was all stone, a stone chamber. And some people say it was a tomb, but there was like an oven and stuff in it.
Right.
And it was like
right.
10 feet below the sub basement of the White House.
What the fuck?
I mean, it's in a bunch. That article's
sense.
in a bunch of papers because it was like pretty big news, I guess, at that time. Like, it's in a bunch.
That'd be pretty wild if like they just like dropped a ton of earth on top of someone's property and their house and everything and just built the White House.
Right. And like, I sort of feel like that's kind of more like what happened was that there was already sites and stuff, and they like, and
we
there
got to
was,
take
like,
your house
foundations and stuff. And then, yeah, I wish I could
I don't
find
know.
it. Sorry.
That's okay. Listen, for part 2, you'll have it right on cue.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll be great.
And honestly,
But,
for part 2, I'll bring some stuff about stone structures if you want, because I have some really crazy stuff that they found, like the pyramids and stuff. It's like really fucking crazy.
Awesome.
Maybe I can even find a pyramid thing quick before we go. Mountains and pyramids. Is this the one?
Ancient ruins.
Oh, no. That's in Austria, so not as interesting. But still interesting. It might be this. Oh yeah, pyramid in the west. So they found this pyramid on the Colorado River. Like I said, there's tons of shit on the Colorado River. A party of 5 young men, while on an exploring expedition recently along the Colorado River, discovered an immense pyramid on a barren plain. It was composed of layers of stone from 18 inches to nearly 3 feet in thickness and from 5 to 8 feet in length. It had a level top of more than 50 feet square, though it was evident that it had been completed and that some great convulsion of nature had displaced its entire top, as it was evidently lying on one of its sides, a huge and broken mass nearly covered with sand. Its present length is 104 feet, and it must have been formerly full 20 feet higher. This pyramid differs in some respects from the Egyptian pyramids. It is or was more slender or pointed, and while those of Egypt, are composed of steps or layers receding as they rise, the American pyramid was undoubtedly a more finished structure. The outer surface of the blocks was evidently cut to an angle that gave the structure, when new and complete, a smooth or regular surface from top to bottom.
Wow.
And that's
pretty
shit's
wild.
everywhere.
Yeah, I mean the Grand Canyon stuff too. That's a treasure trove, and it's the Egyptian hieroglyphics and things like that that are written off as nonsense. There was no back then. There was no market for conspiracy theories involving Egyptians in America. There was no market for this as like tabloid junk or
They were
conspiracy
really
theory.
pumping out the Pompeii Egypt narrative so thick about like, this is the cradle of humanity. Look at all this ancient stuff. It's like everywhere, especially when you get up to the like 1900s, like when it comes into that era, it's really gets heavy into it. And
all
it's
the
like
adventurers, the European conquerors.
I think they're trying to divert from like people exploring what was in their backyard. You know what I mean?
For
like,
sure.
You have to go to Egypt to find the old shit. Never mind this stuff.
And now I see that again happening in a way where, I mean, it's there if you really look for it, but again, it's not popular. When you're talking like ancient civilizations, like ancient apocalypse with Graham Hancock, you're talking ancient aliens, everything they point to, none of it is Europe or what you pulled up an article before this about Austria. And I saw the word Canaanites in there somewhere. So all that shit is never talked about. It's all to do with like the Mesoamerican gods, rightfully so, or, you know, the Persian Gulf religions, the Anunnaki, all these different things. Fair enough. But all this European shit is totally left out of the mix. I had Freddie Silva on twice. Good friend of the show. He's awesome. He's definitely going to come back at some point and talk more about his findings. And I asked him about some Scandinavian stuff and some European things, and he's like, I never really got into that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I'm so shocked because this is such a different area. He's like, I just have my own focus. That's fair, but I notice it a lot that I never see the narrative of the ancient European or ancient Germanic people. Like none of this stuff is allowed to be talked about. You immediately get put in a very unfortunate category if you go too far into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And yeah, I think like everyone just finds their little avenue and kind of like we can't all know everything about, or we all can't look everywhere. So
Sure, yeah.
it is good that everyone has their avenue and they just really dive hard into that, because it's really important that we get every detail, and whether that's them planting their flag or not, it's going to help us figure things out.
And just to clarify about Freddie Silva, for
your
all
friend,
his,
sorry, I wasn't trying to say, yeah.
Oh no, like all of his work, it's he's not biased. It's that I'd
got
say
his avenue, right?
Some of these narratives will attract some parts of these alternative researchers because they can kind of use it.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's convoluted for sure, but it's not them. They're great research. Everybody's a great researcher,
That's what I think. Yeah.
But
as long as everyone's sharing what they find, I appreciate what they're doing.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing. And like everybody that's like putting out all this information, it's coming together in a way that will be attacked and will be preyed upon to control the perceptions of us. When I get into all the ancient alien stuff, that's what I'm talking about. But, even people I've had on like that research and have been on and written books and stuff like that, they often end with, and nobody knows who they were. And it's like, well, I think that's changing.
We can figure it out. Yeah. And I honestly, like when I find something really good, like this book, like I do feel like, a bit attached to it, and it is kind of hard to just give it out. But I honestly always think of that part in Super Troopers when he's like, if you live on the beach, man, do you own the water? And he's like, no, man, it's God's water, man. I'm like, that's what I kind of I just remind myself that every time, like, it's not your information.
You're a communist.
but you know what I mean? Like this information belongs to everyone. As much as I feel like a bit attached to it because I found it, that's just my ego, because it belongs to everybody and we need to share it. Or like, because there's stuff that like even sharing with you, I've learned so much more about it. Or like, I've got to find so much more connections because of sharing.
I feel like that's the most important thing we're doing right now. All of us is just like making the connections. And the more we do that, that's when like the big heavy hitters sometimes come in and go, hey, I think what you guys are looking at points to this, this, and this. And you're like, and that's when the revelation comes again and you start getting momentum again. So it's like the more we share this shit is the better we are.
Yeah, it's really important.
The better off we are.
Everyone share and dig into this stuff and let's solve this puzzle.
So yeah, for now we'll pause and we'll take a break on this and we'll come back for a part 2 really soon, and we'll probably like put them out on both channels and stuff like that. Yeah, this has been awesome, Kalen. Tell the people where
maybe
they can
like
find
even
it.
Parts 3, 4, 5. Let's just keep building this puzzle
and bring different people in for different episodes. I mean, this is what we need. I love doing the multi round table kind of thing. Anyway, it's always how it works best. So.
I'd love to be a part of it one day if you guys want to have me.
I know
some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So tell my audience where they can find you.
Sure. If you guys want to find me, I'm on all major platforms. Strange Neighborhood Podcast. You can find me on all of them pretty much. And also on Instagram, strange_neighborhood_podcast. And on Instagram, I share all kinds of shit that I find all the time. So any like small detail that I haven't quite found a connection for, a lot of old maps, old articles. And then I do talk about like consciousness and stuff a lot because, and I think it's all interwoven really.
It all connects, man.
It does.
Yeah.
So yeah, come find me and let's chat and talk about this stuff. Let's share. Let's compare notes.
Hell yeah.
And why don't you tell my audience where to find you?
Yep.
Andy?
You can find me on all the platforms as well under the Deep Share podcast, and YouTube and Odyssey, and on Instagram and Twitter as the Deep Share. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And do you still have Patreon for your box saga stuff?
I do not for any of the box saga stuff. So like anything data and information related will always be free. I'm not going to do anything like that behind any paywalls.
Awesome.
But Patreon I do have, and my homie Shane Newsom and I are kind of putting together like a sideshow of the Deep Share, where it's just like we're kind of talking about the similar things, but we're showing clips and we're making fun of stuff and we're talking about consciousness. We're all over the board, you know. So yeah, we'll have guests on,
fun talky show kind of hangout. Yeah,
and those will eventually go out to the public feed anyway, like slowly but surely. But yeah, just if you want to support the channel, of course, it's always helpful. But yeah, it's fun. We'll start releasing those soon. Actually, I got one out already on there, but I'll be releasing the public one pretty soon too, just to give everybody a taste. So yeah.
I mean, like, I think that's great. I think that's a good way to make, like, we all are looking for kind of a way to like make an income off this, so we could put more of our time and effort into it, because we all got to make money. We have families and shit. Like, to find like a good way that doesn't compromise our morals or whatever, that we can make a little money. And I think that's a good way, like, to have a pre-release kind of Patreon, or like and then release it later or whatever. But then people that want it first, or like maybe a portion of your show is on Patreon, or I don't know. I haven't quite figured out what I'm gonna do, but I'm kind of
it's anxiety ridden trying to like figure out what you want to do anyway. And most of the time I haven't wanted to do it because my morals get in the way. I feel like I'm doing something wrong or something like that. But yeah, it's just
something.
I'm saying that it's pure entertainment behind the paywall. That's what beauty. It is. That's what I like to do anyway. Like, we're going to branch off and do all kinds of fun stuff, because like I love creating fiction and all kinds of fun things. So we can go anywhere with it. Right. But awesome. I don't want any of this kind of stuff behind the paywall. I want this for everybody that's interested to hear what we're talking about, what we're piecing together, because that's how I even became a podcaster, by hearing what other people were sharing for free, and I'm like, okay, I need to say something about this stuff, because now I have a perspective on it,
and so, maybe a clue to add, right?
Absolutely. That's how we spread. And I always say, like, if like the legacy news channels and the mainstream media give all their lies and propaganda for free, and millions are eating it up because it's free, how is the truth community ever going to compete with that if they're keeping like crucial information, or like this is the whole story? It's a fine line, but I think, if you're just kind of trying to theorize and have fun with it and trying to come up with ideas and stuff, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you go deeper, and you can keep that shit behind a paywall if you want, but I don't know. I have a hard time.
I know, right? But there's also like certain platforms you can use. And then I don't know, I was thinking about adding ads, and then I heard so many Canadian podcasters, because you don't get to choose your ads for some platforms, and then they just have like ads for the CBC and stuff. It's like,
it's
like I don't want that. Like,
part of the machine.
I don't want to advertise for them.
Using Patreon, and part of the machine using Zoom, or like, there's no escape. That's the mentality that creates,
Yeah.
But I don't know. But we're all over the place, my friend. Let's reel it in, say goodnight for tonight, and we'll come back for a part 2 soon.
Yeah, and I'll post the link when I post this. Obviously, you probably will too, for the book and the geography book and anything that I have here, so that everyone can dig in.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deep Share Podcast. If you want to hear more, then hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all the social places. And remember, think for yourself, but don't always believe what you think. Till next time.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, vegetarian. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay? I mean...